The case we're going to talk about today involves a young woman who was just starting out in her adult life. She had made some important decisions and was making plans for her future. However, in the past year, she had been having nightmares that centered around her workplace. In this case, however, it seems like these dreams would eventually come true. Let's talk about Cindy Anderson. Cynthia Jane Anderson was born on February 4, 1961, to parents Michael and Margaret Anderson. She was raised in a strict but loving, fundamentalist Christian home along with her sister and two brothers. The Anderson family lived in Lambertville, Michigan. At the time of this mystery, Cindy was 20 years old and worked as a legal secretary at the law firm of Neller and Rabbit at 559 East Manhattan Boulevard in Toledo, Ohio, which, although in another state, wasn't far from her home. By all accounts, Cindy was a well-liked and valued employee. In the time leading up to this mystery, it had been an exciting time for Cindy. She had made plans to attend William Tyndale College in nearby Farmington Hills, Michigan. Her boyfriend, Jeff Lemke, was already attending there, so they were looking forward to both attending together. Cindy had already put her notice in at the law firm and had just 10 days left to work there. But for the last year or so, in one aspect of her life, Cindy had been struggling. According to Cindy's family, for the past year, she had been having recurring nightmares. Not a lot of details are known about the dreams, or if they were a few similar ones or the same nightmare. Cindy confided to her mother that in the dream, she was taken by someone she trusted. In her dream, this would occur at her job. She also said that she was ultimately killed. As you can imagine, the dreams were very upsetting to Cindy, and all her mother could really do was comfort and be there for her daughter. Then on August 4th, 1981, it would start out like an ordinary workday for Cindy. She prepared for the day as usual. She would usually work alone in the mornings, so for that reason, she would always keep the door locked. She would only open it for people that she knew. That morning, there were a few sightings of Cindy at work. The maintenance man for the plaza said he saw her at her desk at 8:50 a.m. A worker of a nearby grocery store would see her a few minutes after that. Then two people on their way to a nearby health spa wanted to know the time, so they looked inside the law office window and saw Cindy inside. The time was 9:45 a.m. In an article from The Blade in June of 1982, Cindy's mother said that she tried to phone her daughter from approximately 9:40 to 10 a.m., but got no answer. Even though she found it unusual, she thought that since Cindy had skipped breakfast that morning, perhaps she had gone to a restaurant to pick up some food. Then at 10:30 a.m., both her father and her older brother Mark tried to call the law office again. Again, there was no answer. At around noon, attorney James Rabbit arrived at the law office. At first, he thought that perhaps Cindy had gone to lunch. The mail was still in the doorway. The air conditioner was on and the music was playing, and by appearance it seemed like any other day. He even smelled the scent of fingernail polish remover in the air and cotton-tip swabs in the trash can. The phones were ringing off the hook. Cindy had not put them on hold, nor had she left a note on the door, which she would normally do when she would leave for whatever reason. Something else was different on this day. Everything was there except Cindy. Around 1:15 p.m., Attorney Rabbit would learn from Jay Feldstein, who also worked at the Manhattan Boulevard office, that clients had been trying to call into the law firm since 10 a.m. but were getting no answer. Rabbit then contacted Cindy's sister, Christine, who would then call her parents. With still no sign of Cindy by her workplace or her family, at 2:30 p.m., the Toledo Police Department would be contacted. Upon further investigating, they would notice some other noteworthy things. The law office door was locked from the outside with a key, not from the inside like it would have been if Cindy was working inside. Cindy was known to read romance novels on her downtime at the office. There was one on her desk, and when the attorney looked at it, interestingly, it was open to the only violent scene in the book, where a woman was being stabbed to death in her dream. Cindy's purse and keys were gone, but her 1980 white Chevy Citation was parked outside in its usual spot. So judging by the other reported sightings and the phone calls going unanswered, it seems like whatever happened to Cindy happened approximately between 9:45 a.m. and 10 a.m. Cindy's family, as well as her boyfriend Jeff, were very proactive in the search. Police would question them, and it was revealed that attorney Jay Feldstein was actually in court that morning on an unrelated matter for Michael Anderson and his 2 sons, so they were able to eliminate the family as well as the boyfriend quickly. That month had been a particularly violent time in Toledo. In fact, 4 murders had already occurred in the past month, and 3 of the victims had worked for a supermarket chain that had a store in the same plaza that Cindy worked in. Cindy's father would weigh in on the area and say that there were a lot of spooky people around where Cindy worked. He said they would drive by slowly, and his daughter just sat there behind a piece of glass on the main floor. It appears that, maybe due in part to her recurring nightmares that involved being assaulted at work, Cindy had some security concerns at her job. She was there alone most mornings, and there was a large window near her desk where anyone and everyone could watch her. There have been some reports that a panic buzzer was installed for Cindy to alert someone nearby in case of an emergency. That could be true, but the details aren't clear. I did read in a newspaper article from 1982 that about 6 months before Cindy disappeared, Attorney Rabbit had installed an intercom system that was connected to the Radio Shack store next door. He said that all she would have to do was turn around and press it to get connected to someone if she needed help. It is uncertain whether this intercom was the buzzer that is sometimes mentioned, or if it was 2 separate items. Of course, it wasn't utilized the day that Cindy disappeared for whatever reason. It was also uncovered during the police investigation that 10 months before Cindy's disappearance, someone had spray painted on a wall near the strip mall the words, "I love you, Cindy," by GW. This was in plain view of Cindy's desk, and it rattled her. It seemed more than a coincidence, as it was her name and in a place where she could see it. She could not think of who GW could be, however. It would take 6 months, but the graffiti was painted over. It subsequently reappeared on another building not far away. The maintenance man of the strip mall was looked into him being a possible suspect. It would take years and a post on the internet, but the true story of the graffiti would eventually be explained, but we'll talk about that a little later. There would be a reward offered by Cindy's family and church, as well as the lawyers that she worked for. In a newspaper article from 3 months after her disappearance, it had climbed to $9,300. They also gave more details about what she was wearing in case anyone had seen her. Cindy was last seen wearing a white dress with beige sandals. The jewelry she was wearing was a gold watch and a ring with a silver band and a sapphire stone. Cindy's purse, described as a tan-colored burlap purse, was also missing. There were a few calls made to the police department after Cindy's disappearance that got their attention. A female caller phoned them a month after the disappearance and said that Cindy was being held in the basement of a white house in Toledo. She said that there were 2 side-by-side white houses owned by the same family. She went on to say that the family was out of town, but that the son was holding Cindy. They spent a lot of time driving the streets of Toledo looking for 2 houses that matched the description that the caller described. They were unsuccessful in finding anything similar, and it was ultimately thought to be a crank call. After seeing the media attention regarding the disappearance, a client at the law office would come forward with a chilling story. His name was Larry Mullins, and he claimed that on the day before Cindy disappeared, that he had come in to make a payment on a divorce case that one of the attorneys was handling for him. He said that the phone rang at the office and Cindy picked it up. She listened for a few seconds, got a terrified look, and then hung up the phone. When Mullins asked her if she was okay, she told him that those calls had been happening lately. He also said that the terrified look on her face concerned him so much that he asked the police to go check on her. Law enforcement investigated whether serial killers Anthony and Nathaniel Cook could be viable suspects in Cindy's disappearance. They were two African-American brothers who had committed at least 9 murders thought to be racially motivated. One of their victims was thought to work in one of the businesses located in the strip mall where Cindy worked. Both brothers were questioned repeatedly and would always deny they were responsible for Cindy's disappearance. Also, with their past murders, there was never an attempt to hide the bodies. Ultimately, there was nothing to tie them to her disappearance, so police eliminated them, for the most part, as suspects. In January of 1982, police would send out info on Cindy Anderson, as well as her photo, to 3,000 coroners and medical examiners across the country. They wanted them to check any unidentified bodies they had, in case Cindy may be one of them. The police said at this point they can't assume that Cindy is alive or dead. They did have some Jane Does that did have some similarities to Cindy, but testing would eliminate her as a match to them. In the months after the disappearance, the police, as well as Cindy's family and friends, continued to work tirelessly to find her. Her parents would quickly go through the money that they'd saved to remodel their home, and also the money they'd set aside to pay for Cindy's college expenses. As usual in these cases, there were supposed sightings of Cindy and tips called in that amounted to nothing in the end. Some of the ones reported in the newspaper are that there was a girl named Cynthia Anderson working in a truck stop in Texas. It was in fact a girl named Cynthia Anderson, but not the one that was missing. Another report said that a former client of the law firm was heard in a Toledo bar threatening to get the lawyer's secretary. In an article from 1990, Detective Adams, who had worked so hard on Cindy's case, was set to retire. The case was still important to him, and he vowed to continue to work it even after retirement if any new leads came in. After so much time invested, he felt like he knew Cindy Anderson personally. The detective said he does believe Cindy is dead and buried somewhere in Toledo. Police were still working on the case, and he said as recently as the week before, the police gave a polygraph to a client at the law firm whom several callers had mentioned. The test showed that he had no direct knowledge or involvement in her disappearance. In June of 1990, the television show Unsolved Mysteries would recreate Cindy's disappearance. In the opening of the segment, there was a creepy scene that apparently tried to emulate one of the dreams that Cindy had been having before she disappeared. Cindy's father and sister were interviewed. I will say that some of her father's comments have been harshly criticized over the years. He mentioned that Cindy was acting like a debutante before she went missing. He said that she had been spending more time on her face than her stomach. I'll talk about my thoughts on Michael Anderson's comments a little later. The segment did produce many calls, but sadly, none of them were able to help further the investigation. Years would pass and nothing significant would happen in the investigation of the young woman's case. Then a new story broke in 1996, 14 years after the disappearance, that would surprise everyone. Someone whom Cindy knew would be charged with some very serious crimes. This made law enforcement entertain a new theory. Instead of Cindy's vanishing possibly being due to a random abduction, could there be a specific reason why she went missing? In November of 1995, a federal grand jury handed down a 25-count indictment of nine individuals and charged them with involvement in a large drug trafficking ring. Noteworthy to our story, Jose Rodriguez Jr. was named in the indictment. Jose's attorney was also indicted. His name was Richard Neller of the Rabbit and Neller law firm, so in essence one of Cindy's bosses. Neller was accused of going beyond giving Rodriguez legal advice, but actively now participating in various crimes. There would also be something interesting in the indictment, and it would mention Cindy. That part of the indictment read, on August 4, 1981, Jose C. Rodriguez Jr. Richard Neller, and other persons known to the grand jury but not indicted herein, abducted and murdered Cynthia Anderson, Richard Neller's legal secretary, because she had overheard conversations wherein Jose C. Rodriguez Jr. and Richard Neller had discussed armed robberies and their expanding drug business. How this connection came out between Richard Neller and Cynthia Anderson's disappearance involved a supposed jailhouse confession. Scott Hansen was a cellmate of Jose Rodriguez. He told authorities that Rodriguez told him that on Richard Neller's orders, he abducted and killed Cindy with a 9mm handgun. Rodriguez said that this was done because Cindy had overheard conversations between himself and Richard Neller about their drug trafficking and armed robberies. After the news came out about the indictment, authorities would conduct a search around a pond in the Toledo suburb of Perrysburg, Ohio. They also said that they believe there may be other bodies buried in or around the pond. The location of the search was near the home of Jose Rodriguez Jr. The search lasted for 3 days, but nothing of significance was found. Scott Hansen would receive time off of his sentence and placed in the Witness Protection Program in exchange for his testimony. However, he would resume committing robberies even while under witness protection. While back in jail, he even forged documents that resulted in his being released from jail mistakenly. In the end, investigators could find no evidence to corroborate the claims about Rodriguez and Neller being involved in Cindy Anderson's disappearance, and a judge would find Hansen's testimony unreliable. Because of that, no official charges of murder were ever filed against Neller or Rodriguez. Ultimately, Jose Rodriguez Jr. would receive 38 years in prison for the various charges mentioned in the indictment. Richard Neller was found guilty of 1 count of conspiracy to distribute narcotics and 4 counts of unlawful use of a communications facility. He was given 5.5 years in prison. Neller was released in 2001 and was living in a halfway house in Toledo. He had lost his license to practice law in any capacity, but while there he was caught working as a paralegal. He would later die in 2024. Neither Neller nor Rodriguez has been ruled out as suspects in Cindy's disappearance. Sadly, Cindy's mother, Margaret Anderson, would die just 2 years after her daughter's disappearance in 1983 due to cancer at the age of 51. She would be buried on her daughter's 22nd birthday. Her father, Michael, would work tirelessly to try to find his daughter and would do anything he could to keep her name out there. He refused to leave the house where the family lived and where Cindy was raised and would not change the phone number in case his daughter would return or try to phone them someday. He also refused to have his daughter declared dead or hold a memorial service for her, still hoping that she would return one day. Despite all of his efforts, he would pass away in 2007 at the age of 78, with the answers to his daughter's whereabouts still unknown. Remember when I mentioned the graffiti that was signed GW that was placed about 6 months before Cindy's disappearance near her office? As most of you probably know, I was Crystal Dawn, and I moderated the large Unsolved Mysteries message board on Sitcoms Online for over 10 years. Oftentimes, people involved in some capacity with the segments would post and add more information than the show gave us. Well, someone would post on there in 2008 with a very interesting story. It would seemingly solve one mystery to what some thought was a possible clue as to who could have abducted Cindy Anderson. A person with the username CynthiaB0626 posted and said that she was the Cindy that the graffiti message was meant for. She said that the man who wrote it was her boyfriend at the time, Greg Wisniewski. She said that he was the love of her life and that he would spray paint "I love you, Cindy, GW" on everything from overpasses to neighbors' garages. She said that they lived in the neighborhood across the street from the law office, but didn't even know that it was there. They were 17 and 18 years old at the time, and they would frequent the nearby Pizza Hut, so that is why he spray painted the building that just happened to be in Cindy Anderson's view. She said that he was not the maintenance man at the shopping plaza, and that neither one of them had ever knew or had ever met Cindy Anderson. She went on to say that in 1981, she went into the Army and had never even heard of Cindy Anderson's disappearance. She also said that sadly, Greg Wisniewski would die in a motorcycle accident in 1983 at the age of 20. She said that she returned from the Army in 1985, and sometime after that, while spending time with her parents, the Unsolved Mysteries segment on Cindy was playing. It was then for the first time she heard about them trying to make a connection between the graffiti and Cindy's disappearance. She said that she phoned the show, and soon after, a detective came to her house. She told him the story and even had samples of Greg's handwriting that seemed to convince the police of her story. She didn't know about the graffiti being looked at as a possible lead until 1985, and she was frustrated that authorities had spent so much time focusing on it. Now I'll give my opinion on Michael Anderson's comments on his daughter in the Unsolved Mysteries segment. I, like many of you, thought that they were very off-putting, and it was easy to take them the wrong way. Yes, they were a deeply religious family, and perhaps that meant that the father had exceptionally high standards for his children. It sounds like he was frustrated that Cindy was so focused on her appearance before she disappeared. But also remember that this is just a soundbite, and that we didn't hear the entire interview that he gave. I understand everyone's opinion of this guy's comments, I really do, but I think that we need to give him a break. He clearly loved his daughter deeply and did everything in his power for 26 years until his death to try to find her. Remember, he even refused to move out of the house or change his number. He didn't want her declared officially dead for his hope that she had amnesia and would come walking through the door one day. His actions and immense love as a father are not in question, so we shouldn't judge him for his poor choice of words in one interview. As far as my thoughts on this case, there are several possible scenarios that come to mind. First off, could Cindy have suffered some kind of mental break, or perhaps suffered from amnesia like her father theorized in the Unsolved Mysteries segment? That is possible. Cindy did have a lot going on in her life at the time. The excitement of starting college could have also been stressful. Plus, the recurring nightmares had her on edge. I've never given the paperback book Turn to a Violent Scene much weight, unless perhaps when she read that part, it took her back to the nightmares and she panicked and fled on foot. But if that was the case, and with her being in a pretty big city, you would think that she would have turned up eventually. Another scenario that I thought of, but you don't hear much about in coverage of this disappearance, is did Cindy leave that morning purposely, like to go get some coffee or food? They did say that she skipped breakfast that morning, so she could have been hungry. That also might explain why she took her purse and keys, and why the door was locked from the outside. Could someone have abducted Cindy while she was on the street? She didn't put the phones on hold, but perhaps she thought she'd be right back, so she didn't bother. If you have remembered, I have covered the case of Trevelyan Evans, who put a sign up in her shop window that she would be back in 5 minutes and disappeared never to return. We have explained the theory away of the man who wrote the graffiti, and I don't think that he was responsible. He was deeply in love with his girlfriend, Cindy, and she said in her post on the Unsolved Mysteries forum that he had spray painted those words in various places all over town. I do know that police did question the maintenance man, who is now deceased, and although I doubt anyone was ever officially ruled out, he wasn't thought to be a likely suspect in this case. Could Cindy have fallen victim to a stalker? I think that is very possible. She was a pretty young woman who basically sat in front of a window alone every morning. There could have been someone who admired her and finally got the nerve up to talk to her. Maybe he saw a chance to approach her or persuaded her to open the door under false pretenses and abducted her. Possibly along the lines of stalker behavior, but could it have been a client? There could have absolutely been a client that Cindy was friendly with. They would come into the law office regularly or pay their bill. If Cindy trusted them enough, she could have even let them in that morning. Also, remember Larry Mullins, the client who said she was getting harassing phone calls while he was there. I'm curious if he was ever investigated, or if they were able to confirm that he did ask the police to go check on her the day before. I'm not accusing him of anything, but given the timing of his comments about her behavior and her disappearance, it is certainly something that deserves to be investigated. Could the jailhouse informant story be true, and did Richard Neller direct his client, Jose Rodriguez, to murder Cindy? I think this is very possible. One thing that stands out to me is that Cindy apparently took her purse and keys with her. You would think if someone just came in and grabbed her, she wouldn't have had time or the chance to do that. If Rodriguez and Neller, or even just Neller, came in that day, Cindy wouldn't have thought anything of it. Perhaps he told Cindy that she needed to go somewhere with him, and that is why she took her purse and keys. It is entirely possible that Cindy could have overheard some incriminating information during their meetings. I am curious what was Richard Neller's alibi on the morning that Cindy went missing. However, there are a few things about this theory that give me pause that I want to mention. First off, it appears that Cindy hadn't said anything to her family about overhearing anything about illegal activity at the law office. She was close enough to her family that I think she would have confided to them about it. Also, if she hadn't said anything to anyone about information she heard, she was leaving that job in 10 days and wouldn't be a threat anymore, so why bother killing her? Also, Cindy wasn't the only employee in the law office. There were others, including the other attorneys, who could have overheard conversations in the small office, so why single out the well-liked secretary and go to the extreme of killing her? So I don't really have a clear-cut opinion on what happened to Cindy. If I had to choose one, I would probably say that Richard Neller had something to do with it, since he was involved in shady and illegal activity at the time of her disappearance. A close second would be that Cindy had some sort of stalker that no one knew about, who got up his nerve that morning and was able to get in contact with Cindy or got her to open the door to grab her. But the one thing I keep coming back to is, why did Cindy take her purse and keys with her if she was forcibly taken out of the office? The definition of vanish is to disappear suddenly, completely, or mysteriously from sight or cease to exist. That is exactly what Cindy Anderson did. She vanished. Her disappearance will mark a somber milestone later this year. It will mark 35 years, and still there are no answers. There are no new leads to follow, and no clear-cut reason how or why she disappeared. If this case troubles us, imagine how difficult these decades with no answers have been on Cynthia's family. Her siblings are still searching for the conclusion in this heartbreaking mystery. It would be nice if Cindy's remains could be located and she could be laid next to her parents who worked so hard to try to find her. Until then, the answers are still unknown about how and why Cindy had a premonition to peril. That concludes my podcast on Cindy Anderson. If you liked it, please leave me a rating or review where you listen to your podcasts. You can find me on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, YouTube, and YouTube Music under one word, Lost and Found Podcast. I also have a Patreon channel where I have exclusive podcasts on lesser-known missing persons cases. You can find all of my original articles, as well as links to my most recent podcasts, on my website at Lost and Found Blogs. I also have social media pages under that name on Facebook, Instagram, and X. You can reach me via email at lostandfoundpodcast@yahoo. Also, if this case interests you, you should check out my podcast episode number 12 on Trevelyan Evans. Like Cindy, she also vanished from her workplace in the middle of the day, never to be seen again. And remember that cold cases stay cold because their story stops getting told.